The birth order system or of person definition represents, therefore, a kind of plus chance approach to the denomination of individuals. It distinguishes them according to four completely contentless appellations which neither define genuine classes, for there is no conceptual or social reality whatsoever to the class of all Wayans or Alctus in a community, nor express any concrete characteristics of the individuals to whom they are applied, for there is no notion that Wayans have any special psychological or spiritual traits in common against Normans or Ctuts. These names, which have no literal meaning in themselves, they are not numerals or derivatives of numerals, do not in fact even indicate siblings' position or rank in any realistic or reliable way. A Wayan may be a fifth or ninth child as well as a first, and given a traditional peasant demographic structure, great fertility plus a high rate of stillbirths and deaths in infancy and childhood, a maid or a Ktut may actually be the oldest of a long string of siblings and a Wayan the youngest. What they do suggest is that for all procreating couples, beards form a circular succession of Wayans, Newmans, Mads, Ktuts, and once again Mayans, an endless four-stage replication of an imperishable form. Physically, men come and go as the ephemerae they are. But socially, the dramatis personae remains eternally the same, as new Wayans and Ktut emerge from the timeless world of the gods. For infants, too, are but a step away from divinity to replace those who dissolve once more into it. Kinship terms. Formally, Balinese kinship terminology is quite simple in type, being of a variety known technically as Hawaiian or generational. In this sort of system, an individual classifies his relatives primarily according to the generation they occupy with respect to his own. That is to say, siblings, half-siblings, and cousins, and their spoused siblings, and so forth, are grouped all together under the same term. All uncles and aunts on either side, the terminologically classed with mother and father, all children of brothers, sisters, cousins, and so on. That is, nephews of one sort of another, are identified with own children, and so on. Downward through the grandchild, the great-grandchild, etc. Generations, and upward through the grandparent, great-grandparent, etc. ones. For any given actor, the general picture is a layer cake arrangement of relatives, each layer consisting of a different generation of kin, that of actor's parents or his children, of his grandparents or his grandchildren, and so on, with his own layer the one from which the calculations are made, located exactly halfway up the cake. Given the existence of this sort of system, the most significant and rather unusual fact about the way it operates in Bali is that the terms it contains are almost never used vocatively, but only referentially, and then not very frequently. With rare exceptions, one does not actually call one's father or uncle father, one's child or nephew niece child, one's brother or cousin brother, and so on. For relatives genealogically junior to oneself, vocative forms do not even exist. For relatives senior, they exist, but as with personal names, it is felt to demonstrate a lack of respect for one's elders to use them. In fact, even the referential forms are used only when specifically needed to convey some kinship information as such, almost never as general means of identifying people. Kinship terms appear in public discourse only in response to some question or in describing some event which has taken place or is expected to take place, with respect to which the existence of the kin tie is felt to be a relevant piece of information. Are you going to further off regrets tooth feeling? Yes, he is my brother. Those two modes of address and reference within the family are no more, or not much more, intimate or expressive of kin ties in quality than those within the hamlet generally. As soon as a child is old enough to be capable of doing so, say 6 years, though this naturally varies, he calls his mother and father by the same term, a technonym, status group title, or public title that everyone else who is acquainted with them uses toward them, and is called in turn Wayan, Ktut, or whatever by them. And with even more certainty, he will refer to them, whether in their hearing or outside of it, by this popular extra-domestic term as well. In short, the Balinese system of kinship terminology defines individuals in a primarily taxonomic, not a face-to-face idiom, as the occupants of regions in a social field, not patterns in social interaction. It functions almost entirely as a cultural map upon which certain persons can be located and certain others, not features of the landscape mapped, cannot. Of course, some notions of appropriate interpersonal behavior follow once such determinations are made. Once a person's place is, the structure is ascertained, but the critical point is that in concrete practice, kin terminology is employed virtually exclusive in service of ascertainment, not behavior, with respect to those patterning. Other symbolic appliances are dominant. The social norms associated with kinship, though real enough, are habitually overridden, even within kinship type groups themselves, families, households, lineages, by culturally better armed norms associated with religion, politics, and most fundamentally of all, social stratification. Yet, in spite of the rather secondary role it plays in shaping the moment-to-moment flow of social intercourse. The system of kinship terminology, like the personal naming system, contributes importantly, if indirectly, to the Balinese notion of personhood. For as a system of significant symbols is to embody a conceptual structure under whose agency individuals, oneself, as well as others are apprehended, a conceptual structure which is moreover in shrinking congruence with those embodied in the other, differently constructed and variantly oriented orders of persons' definition. Here also the leading motive is the immobilization of time through the iteration of form. This iteration is accomplished by a feature of Balinese kin terminology I have yet to mention. In the third generation above and below the actor's own, terms become completely reciprocal. That is to say, the term for great-grandparent and great-grandchild is the same, kumpi. The two generations and the individuals who comprise them are culturally identified. Symbolically, a man is equated upwardly with the most distant ascendant, downwardly with the most distant descendant. He is ever likely to interact with as a living person. Actually, this sort of reciprocal terminology proceeds on through the fourth generation and even beyond. But as it is only extremely rarely that the lives of a man and his great-grandparent or a great-grandchild overlap, this continuation is of only theoretical interest, and most people don't even know the terms involved. It is the fourth generation span, the actor's own plus three ascending or descending, which is considered the attainable ideal, the image like our 70 of a fully completed life, and around which the kumpi terminology puts, as it were, an emphatic cultural parenthesis. This parenthesis is accentuated further by the rituals surrounding death. At a person's funeral, all his relatives who are generationally junior to him must take homage to his lingering spirit in the Hindu palms to forehead fashion, both before his bier and later at the graveside. But this virtually absolute obligation, the sacramental heart of the funeral ceremony, stops short with the third descending generation, that of his children. His great-grandchildren are his kumpi, as he is theirs, and so the Balinese say they are not really junior to him at all, but rather the same age. As such, they are not only not required to show homage to his spirit, but they are expressly forbidden to do so. A man prays only to the gods and, what is the same thing, his seniors, not to his equals or juniors. Balinese kinship terminology does not only divide human beings into generational layers with respect to a given actor, it bends these layers into a continuous surface which joins the lowest with the highest, so that rather than a layer cake image, a cylinder marked off into 6 parallel bands called own, parent, grandparent, kumpi, grandchild, and child, it perhaps more exact. What at first glance seems a very diachronic formulation, stressing the ceaseless progression of generations is in fact an assertion of the essential unreality, or anyway, the unimportance of such a progression. The sense of sequence of sets of collaterals following one another through time is an illusion generated by looking at the terminological system as though it were used to formulate the changing quality of face-to-face interactions between a man and his kinsman as he ages and dies, as indeed many, if not most, such systems are used. When one looks at it, the Balinese primarily do, as a common sense taxonomy of the possible types of familial relationships human beings may have, a classification of kinsmen into natural groups, it is clear that what the bands on the cylinder are used to represent is the genealogical order of seniority among living people and nothing more. They depict the spiritual and, what is the same thing, structural relations among coexisting generations, not the locations of successive generations in an unrepeating historical process. Ethnonyms. If personal names are treated as though they were military secrets, beer order names, applied mainly to children and young adolescents and kinship, terms invoked at best sporadically, and then only for purposes of secondary specification. How then do most Balinese address and refer to one another? For the great mass of the peasantry, the answer is by technonyms. As soon as a couple's first child is named, people begin to address and refer to them as father of and mother of Regrid, Pula, or whatever the child's name happens to be. They will continue to be so called and to call themselves until their first grandchild is born, at which time they will begin to be addressed and referred to as grandfather of and grandmother of Suda, Lilir, or whomever, and a similar transition occurs if they live to see their first great-grandchild. Thus, over the natural fourth-generation Kumpi to Kumpi lifespan, the term by which an individual is known will change 3 times. At first he, then at least one of his children, and finally, at least one of his grandchildren produce offspring. Of course, many, if not most people, neither live so long nor prove so fortunate in the fertility of their descendants. Also, a wide variety of other factors enter into complicate this simplified picture. But subtleties aside, the point is that we have here a culturally exceptionally well developed and socially exceptionally influential system of technonymy. What impact does it have upon the individual Balinese perceptions of himself and his acquaintances? Its first effect is to identify the husband and wife pair rather as the bride's taking on off her husband's surname does in our society, except that here it is not the act of marriage which brings out the identification, but of procreation. Symbolically, the link between husband and wife is expressed in terms of their common relation to their children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, not in terms of wife's incorporation into her husband's family. which as marriage is highly endogamous, she usually belongs to any he usually belongs to anyway. Boom.